Hundreds died here. Here in these ruins can be seen physical evidence of the Viet Cong's Tet Offensive. But far less tangible is what these ruins mean, and like everything else in this burned and blasted and weary land, they mean success or setback, victory or defeat, depending upon whom you talk to.
Walter Cronkite, anchor of the CBS Evening News, brought the triumphs, the travails, and the tragedies of the Vietnam War into American living rooms every single night. Now, a new docuseries on Netflix takes a fresh look at the conflict using extensive interviews, CBS News archives, and declassified government records.
There's a stark difference between the before and the after when it comes to the Vietnam War. And one of those turning points is this thing called the credibility gap. That's a gap between what the government is telling you and what is actually happening on the ground.
Earlier this week, I spoke with director Brian Knappenberger for a first look at his series, Turning Point, the Vietnam War. There is an entire generation or two of Americans who know next to nothing about Vietnam. Is your film for them or for us who are still traumatized by it because we lived through some parts of it?
Well, I think it's both. It has a lot of people that were that went to Vietnam, that were around at that period of time, and in which the legacy is still raw. But I do believe that legacy and the effects of the Vietnam War are still very much with us right now. This was a very much a turning point in American history. The America that existed, before the United States engaged militarily in Vietnam was just a radically different country than the America that emerged after our troops came home. And that America that emerged contained the roots of a lot of what plagues our society today, I think. Widespread alienation, deep cynicism, a profound distrust in government, breakdown in our civic institutions. And, the military lessons were just as profound. The Vietnam War forced a serious reckoning with America's role in the world. And yet those lessons were largely ignored, leading to similar repeat disasters in Afghanistan, in Iraq. So I think that the wounds are still raw for a lot of people that live through it today. I was struck by the fact that some of the people that stormed the United States Capitol on January 6th carried the long defunct flag of South Vietnam. So that's sort of an indication of kind of reminder about that the shadow of that war is very long and perhaps still not fully understood. It left lasting marks, both visible and invisible on many people, including me. My dad was in Vietnam when I was born, and it was only about 8 months later at a brief respite in Hawaii that I actually met him for the first time. So I think it's both revisiting for people who have memories of that time and were traumatized by it, but introducing it to people who may not realize how much it set the groundwork for the world that we live in today.
CBS News covered that war extensively. How much of the film was shaped by your access to CBS News archives?
Quite a bit, actually. CBS was, I think it's fair to say, one of the main kind of news organizations that really kind of dug in and photographed the Vietnam War. And for one reason or another, a lot of that footage just hadn't really been seen. I don't know if buried in the archive or whatever, but we really were given access and very much excited and very grateful that we had access to this treasure trove of stuff that had been photographed there, and some of these correspondents and some of these moments that remarkably had never been seen. So it is really striking. I mean, it pulls you into those moments to see this. This is a television war, but it's also a war in which the technology of image making is changing dramatically, and so you're starting to really be with handheld cameras and recording devices in ways that just didn't happen in wars before Vietnam, and so to have access to that stuff really pulls us into it. It really. I just think people that watch this series will be immersed in the events of the Vietnam War in a way they've never seen before.
And Brian, as I understand it, the film series takes a look at 3 administrations dealing with Vietnam. And I would say that the through line for the 3, lots of smart people working hard, but making a series of mistakes and blunders that they not only lie to themselves about, but they lie to the public about.
No question about that. if you look at the early days of Vietnam, we do cover primarily three. We go back even further a little bit to the origins, but we primarily covered Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. But in the early days of the American involvement in Vietnam, the conversation around engaging militarily was deeply rooted in Cold War thinking, which goes back a little bit to the previous season of Turning Point about the Cold War. But it really came out of these, accusations were flying within the United States government about who was responsible for losing China at the time to communism. The Cold War view of communism was very, very stark. People believed, that if one country fell, that others would follow in this kind of domino effect, eventually coming to San Francisco and turning the United States communist. But yeah, doubts began to surface, even even questioning the threat of communism itself, but even really early on about whether the United States could even win a war like this. And I think one of the most profound aspects of the Vietnam War and central to this series is how much figures at the highest level, those figures, Kennedy, add McNamara, McGeorge Bundy, later Johnson, Nixon, Kissinger, how much they knew that the war was a lost cause. They understood they couldn't win, but chose not to tell the American public about it, or they were to actively lie to the American public. And that betrayal of trust turned out to be a disaster. So we went through hundreds of hours, in addition to this kind of remarkable CBS footage that we found that is so immersive in this time period. We actually went through hundreds of hours of recordings, presidential recordings. These are the three presidents that primarily recorded themselves, presidents after this period, particularly after what happened to Nixon. Don't do that anymore, that we know of. But with the help of the presidential recordings program at the Miller Center, a lot of them, these recordings that I don't think people have ever heard before, really showed that contrast, that stark contrast, that disconnect between what presidents were saying to the American public and what they were saying and thinking, saying privately and thinking in a little more candid setting. It's pretty stark. And so mostly this war, back to your question, was really fought around presidential elections. Electoral politics in the United States dictated a lot of the decisions that were made.
My thanks to Brian Knappenberger. Turning Point, the Vietnam War, will be available on Netflix on April 30th. That marks the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.